There's a scene in Hitchcock's film, The 39 Steps, in which, as many of you will surely recall, the beleaguered hero, Richard Hannay, trying to evade both the British police and an underground network of foreign spies, finds himself at a political rally at which he is mistaken for the principal speaker scheduled to lecture at that evening's event. Knowing nothing at all about the candidate on whose behalf he is supposed to talk, Hannay discovers, with a growing sense of exhilarated abandon, the sheer joy of performing, the excitement of calling forth from his intellectual storehouse of social roles and public rhetoric a dazzling extemporaneous speech whose combination of rousing political cliches and utterly vacuous political content carries the crowd before him in a vocal paroxysm of frenzied assent. Well, I, like Richard Hannay, come before you tonight with nothing to say. In fact, when I scribbled these brief remarks last night, I, like you, had not seen the film that we gathered together to view. But why should that stand in my way, I thought. This is America after all, and we are gathered more precisely in an American classroom. The very classroom, in fact, in which I teach a course on Hitchcock every Monday afternoon. And in what American classroom, I ask you, does the mere condition of having nothing to say ever stop anyone from choosing to say it? At great length, nonetheless. Must those who have nothing to say be condemned just for exercising their freedom to say it in public? Silence may be golden, but we in America have abandoned the gold standard. Indeed, some might say we've abandoned all standards altogether. But I say that so long as each one of us is free to have nothing to say, and yet not just say nothing, so long as we are judged by the number of our words and not simply by their value, America will remain the envy of the world and an inspiration to long-winded women and men from all corners of the globe. And that brings me to the two words about which I want us to think for a few minutes tonight. The words that indeed have brought us together. Magical words, lyrical words, evocative words. Virginia Creeper. For what could be more American than a psychological horror film with a title like Virginia Creeper? Even without having seen it, at the mere mention of these words, your imagination starts to construct a definitively American cinematic experience. And all at once, an imaginary film begins to play itself out in your mind. Can't you see it now? The camera pans across the pristine foliage of an island off the North Carolina coast. It lingers over the bucolic landscape to strains of something by Handel, perhaps, until we make out, in the smoky distance, the smoldering ruins of a colonial town. The camera tracks in toward one burning wooden house, and our attention is focused briefly on a sign precariously swinging on its hinge, a sign that reads in decorative script, "Welcome to ye old Dare family home." Still tracking closer, the camera seems to pass through the smoke that pours out from one open window, and then, as the superimposed title card announces, Roanoke, 1589, we zoom in on the body of little Virginia Dare, and the screen fades to black on the image of her corpse. Fade into a scene 400 years later, defined as Roanoke, 1989. A brief delay, and then one last title appears on the screen to specify the date as, oh, I don't know, let's say, Halloween. And as a pair of bewildered teenagers, dressed perhaps as John Smith and Pocahontas, pause to identify the squeaking sounds that have interrupted their lovemaking in a dark and deserted house, the camera tracks to the foot of the stairs where we see, slowly creeping from step to step, the animated corpse of young Virginia, with a look of vengeance in her infantile eye, a diabolical gurgle in her juvenile throat, and an endearing trace of drool on her ever-so-sweetly pouting lips. In extreme close-up, the camera frames those cherubic little lips, and as Virginia creeps forward, they curl open in a smile. A strand of drool dribbles from out of her mouth and turns blood red, as it stretches to form the letters that spell out the title, Virginia Creeper. Now, of course, it's just barely possible that that isn't what the film is about. That Virginia Creeper, that resonant phrase that designates not only the film itself, but also the company that put together to produce the film, refers to something completely different. Perhaps it names the film's title character, the intensely intellectual youngest daughter of Leslie and Julia Creeper, a psychotically depressive young would-be novelist whose identification with a famous author from the Bloomsbury crowd leads her to turn out unsuccessful imitations with regrettable titles like To the Blight House or A Doom of One's Own. But no, I must be confusing that with the other film, Who's Afraid of Virginia Creeper? As it turns out, though, I am happy to tell you that, yes, Virginia, there is a creeper. Even, to be precise, a Virginia creeper that appears in the film we'll be viewing tonight. So I thought it might be helpful if we all understood at the outset exactly what a Virginia creeper is, since that knowledge might offer some clue about the nature of what we're shortly to see. So with the indulgence of all the botanists in the house, let me read. Virginia creeper, also called woodbine and American ivy, a woody vine in the grape family that climbs by means of disc-tipped tendrils. It is commonly found in eastern North America and is often grown as a covering for walks, fences, and trunks of large trees. Its fall color ranges from yellow to red-purple. Several cultivated varieties with smaller leaves and shorter tendrils have been developed to provide denser coverage. A related woody vine, Boston ivy, is similarly used, unquote. So there we have the Virginia creeper, and perhaps in the hint of its relation to the apparently more local Boston ivy, an indication of the way in which this symbol hits closer to home. For the Virginia creeper is a cover, a screen, like the cinema screen itself. It puts on a spectacular and colorful show, but the show is an attempt to cover up something that stays hidden from view, something repressed or denied. The very title, therefore, should put us on guard. It should lead us toward a state of aroused suspicion that always has the potential to degenerate into the madness of paranoid delusion. Which leads me, of course, to a few final questions to consider as we view the product of so much hard work by so many talented and dedicated individuals. First and foremost, since Provost Saul Edelman, who was supposed to be here and will only be represented by a letter that Professor Collins will read later tonight, isn't here, you might be led to wonder, does he know something that we don't know? Or even more ominously, you might start to wonder just what the Virginia creeper has done with Provost Edelman. After all, does anyone here really believe that a company that calls itself Virginia Creeper will scruple to do whatever is necessary in order to assure their success? And do we think they'll give a second thought to an abducted provost here or there when they've gone Hollywood and are chatting with Mary Hart on Entertainment Tonight? It kind of makes you wonder if it's really just a coincidence that 4 days before Virginia Creeper is scheduled to have its initial screening, we learn, completely out of the blue, that Greta Garbo is dead. Surely there's more here than meets the eye. I can see it now, can't you? The camera zooms in on that aged but unforgettable and still utterly heartbreaking face. Then we cut to an extremely close framing of her too long silent lips as that husky Swedish voice rasps out the phrase, Virginia Creeper. Her head rolls lifelessly to one side, and then we see her frail hand drop, and from it falls a long spool of film that unravels across the entire length of her room. But that, of course, is another story, one I'm afraid that is not destined to be told until at least after Paul Hogan completes his anticipated sequel to Virginia Creeper, tentatively titled Australian Crawl. And just think of all the other sequels waiting to be made. Tendrils terrorize the innocent passengers in an all-terrain vehicle in the horrifying spectacle destined to be billed as Jeepers Creepers. A man goes berserk and murders his sibling in that gripping saga, Am I My Brother's Creeper? A nearsighted nature lover collects specimens of a strangely active and colorful plant in the somewhat sappy Finders Creepers, and the entire Tufts geology department disappears while scouting out a murky swamp in that dark fantasy, Creeper from the Black Lagoon. The possibilities are endless, but you and I will have to wait until those films show up at the mall. Tonight, however, we have before us the pleasure of seeing the cinematic stock from which those later offshoots will grow. So let me join my voice to yours in celebrating the formidable talents of those who made this project a reality, and let me express my unmitigated joy at being present tonight at the screening of the one, the only, the original Virginia Creeper.